Her stepmother tore her graduation certificate and mocked her, but years later. The rain had started as a soft drizzle, but by the time Olivia reached the gate, it had turned into a steady downpour. She didn't care. Her shoes were soaked, the hem of her shawl were clung to her ankles, and her hijab was damp, but none of that mattered. Clutched tightly in her hands, inside a transparent folder she had borrowed from a classmate, was the most precious thing she had ever owned, her graduation certificate. Her chest rose and fell with excitement. After years of struggling, sneaking in study hours while doing household chores, enduring scorn and insults, she had made it. She had graduated. Not just passed, but topped her class in literature. Her name was there in bold, Olivia Qureshi, proof that she was more than what the walls of this house had tried to confine her into. She pushed open the gate and stepped inside the dim corridor. Water dripped from her sleeves onto the folder. She entered the living room, face glowing, only to come to a halt. Farhat stood by the kitchen door, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. Olivia raised the certificate, beaming. "I did it," she whispered. Farhat took 3 sharp steps forward, snatched the folder, and without reading a word, tore the certificate down the center. Again. And again. The sound of ripping paper echoed like thunder. "You think a piece of paper will change who you are?" she sneered. Olivia stood frozen, heart shattering with each tear. Her stepbrother chuckled. Her half-sister muttered, "Drama queen." As the pieces fluttered to the floor, Olivia knelt, gathered them with trembling fingers, and held them to her chest. She didn't say a word. But inside, something lit up, not a flame of sorrow, but of fire. At 19, Olivia's world was the size of her neighborhood and the weight of her torn certificate. Without formal proof of her education, she was locked out of nearly every opportunity. Application after application was met with silence or curt rejections. Even the receptionist at a private school sneered when she admitted she didn't have documents to back her grades. "We don't hire stories," the woman said. "We hire credentials." The small part-time job at the local diner wasn't glamorous, but it was all she could find. She washed dishes, scrubbed greasy counters, and cleared tables with quiet efficiency. Her palms grew rough, and her back ached constantly. At home, the work didn't end. Farhat treated her like unpaid help, making her scrub the floors, do everyone's laundry, and cook meals without a word of thanks. Meanwhile, her stepbrother played video games on a new console, and her half-sister flaunted branded clothes from online shopping sprees. Olivia endured in silence. Every night, when the house finally quieted, she would pull out her old canvas bag, unzip it carefully, and take out a small, battered notebook. On its cover, she had scribbled the title in blue ink, "Someday, When I Return." Inside were dreams, not poems or stories, but plans. Sketches of what she would do if she ever escaped. A school she would build. A library for girls like her. A scholarship fund in her father's name. She also tutored 2 neighborhood children in secret, charging only 50 rupees an hour. The mothers didn't know she had no certificate, and the children adored her for making fractions sound like magic. To make ends meet, she learned to sew clothes for a neighbor, often working into the early morning. Only one thing gave her real strength, a photo of her late father on the bookshelf, eyes kind and proud. She would look at him in the dark and whisper, "I'm not done yet, Abu. Not even close." The diner was unusually quiet that evening, just a few regulars and the hum of an old ceiling fan slicing through the silence. Olivia moved briskly from table to table, collecting empty plates and wiping down surfaces. Her mind wasn't on the work. She had slipped a math problem into her apron pocket, one she'd seen in a borrowed exam prep book from the library. During her 5-minute break, she sat at the back table and pulled it out, scribbling solutions on a napkin with a cheap pen. "What's that?" came a curious voice. Olivia looked up, startled. An older woman with sharp eyes and a firm but kind face stood watching her. She wore a faded shawl and gold-rimmed glasses and sipped slowly on a cup of tea. "It's just a math problem," Olivia said, folding the napkin quickly. "You solved that by yourself?" the woman asked, incredulous. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. I taught myself. From books." The woman leaned forward, interested. "I'm Shamim. I taught mathematics and general studies for 35 years. And you have a mind built for more than this place. Embarrassed, Olivia looked down. It's just something I do to keep from feeling useless. Mrs. Shamim smiled gently. You ever heard of the civil service exam? Later that week, they met at Mrs. Shamim's small flat near the mosque. Olivia arrived with her worn notebook and trembling hands. Mrs. Shamim opened her own with a proud flourish. Thus began their quiet ritual, late-night tutoring sessions fueled by tea, equations, and hope, each hour a stitch in the future Olivia dared to believe might finally belong to her. It didn't take long for Farhat to notice the change. Olivia had started coming home a little later, her clothes faintly smelling of someone else's perfume, her hands smudged with ink, her eyes brighter, like she was holding on to a secret. One evening, Farhat cornered her in the kitchen. Where do you go after the diner? Don't lie. Olivia hesitated for a moment too long. Who are you meeting? Farhat snapped, voice rising. You think I don't know what girls like you do in the dark? It's just study, Olivia whispered. I've been preparing for the civil service exam. Farhat's laugh was sharp and cruel. Study? With what brain? You think someone like you will become an officer? You'll be lucky if a mechanic agrees to marry you. From that day forward, Farhat locked the front gate before dusk. She took Olivia's phone, citing bad influences. She even threatened to throw out the few books Olivia kept hidden under the bed. But Olivia had saved enough. Quietly, carefully, money from tutoring, from sewing, tips from kind customers at the diner. One night, after the house fell silent, she slipped out with nothing but her notebook, a small bag of clothes, and her father's photo. She arrived at the women's hostel at midnight. It was simple, the paint peeling, the mattress thin, but the door had a lock that was hers. The next morning, a relative called. Farhat says you're dead to the family. Olivia stared out the window at the rising sun and replied, then let me live like I've never lived before. The civil service exam was a mountain no one could climb alone. Olivia learned that quickly. At the hostel, she shared a cramped study hall with 10 other girls, each hunched over books that looked like they'd been through war. The air constantly smelled of instant coffee and worn paper. Sleep became a rare luxury. Olivia would wake at 4:30, brush her teeth with freezing water, and sit under the flickering tube light with a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, pages spread out like a battlefield in front of her. Breakfast was usually a piece of toast, sometimes stale, with watery tea. But she didn't complain. Her mind was set like flint. In one of the prep classes offered nearby, she met Zoya, a loud, sharp-tongued girl from Karachi who had escaped a suffocating family that wanted her married by 18. Zoya smoked secretly, cursed generously, and studied like her life depended on it. Next came Salman, a quiet boy who rarely spoke but solved mock exams like a machine. His father was a tailor, his mother deaf, and he studied so he could one day change their lives. The three were an unlikely trio, but they found comfort in each other's company. Zoya brought sarcasm, Salman brought calm, and Olivia brought fire. When one faltered, the others pulled them up. When doubts crept in, they argued, cried, laughed, and returned to their books. For Olivia, studying wasn't just about ambition. It was about revenge, not the kind that hurt others, but the kind that proved every cruel word Farhat ever said wrong. Every time her eyes grew heavy, she remembered Farhat's voice, "You'll never become anything." And she'd push through the exhaustion. She didn't just want to pass. She wanted to rise. She wanted the world to say her name, and mean it. The results came out on a dry, suffocating afternoon. The electricity had gone, so the hostel was quiet. No fans, no noise, just heavy breaths and anxious fingers tapping on phones. Olivia sat cross-legged on her bed, the phone trembling in her hand as she typed in her roll number. Her thumb hovered over the submit button. She closed her eyes. Pressed. A second later, the screen blinked. Result, not qualified. Score, 683. Passing score, 685. Her heart stopped. 2 marks. Just 2. Her vision blurred. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. Zoya, who had just burst into the room cheering her own pass, stopped mid-celebration when she saw Olivia's face. I failed, Olivia whispered, staring blankly. By 2 marks. Zoya looked at the phone. Then at her. So what? You'll try again? No, Aliyah said, her voice cracking. Maybe Farhat was right. Maybe this just isn't for me. Maybe I'll always be the girl with no certificate. In a sudden burst of rage, Zoya slapped the study desk so hard the cup of pencils fell over. Don't you dare, she growled. You are not her. You are not giving up because you lost once. Aliyah sat in silence for a long moment. Then she wiped her tears with the back of her hand, stood up, and picked up the prep books from the floor. One more year, she said softly. Her eyes were bloodshot, but burning. This time, I'm not just going to pass. I'm going to leave no doubt. Aliyah sat at the same desk, in the same hostel room, with the same knot in her stomach. But this time, something was different. Her hands didn't shake when she typed in her roll number. Her breath didn't hitch. She had poured herself into every chapter, every mock exam, every question. Failure had burned her, but it had also forged her. When the screen loaded, there was no red this time. Just bold green letters, qualified. Merit rank, first, district level. Her name right there, above thousands. Aliyah didn't react at first. Her brain needed time to accept it. Then her lips trembled. Her hands covered her face. She didn't cry out, but tears slid down her cheeks. Zoya glanced over her shoulder and screamed so loudly the whole hallway echoed. You did it! You crazy, brilliant woman, you did it! Salman walked in just then, and when he saw the result, he didn't speak. He just blinked hard, then hugged her like a younger brother would, eyes brimming with silent pride. Aliyah sat there, surrounded by chaos, joy, and noise. But inside her, it was calm. She had the official letter now. The emblem. The seal. The authority. They once tore her certificate. Now, the government of Pakistan had written her name in ink no one could destroy. The government car stopped at the mouth of the narrow lane where she had grown up. Aliyah stepped out slowly, heels clicking against the uneven pavement, the crisp folds of her navy blue civil service uniform sharp under the late afternoon sun. The entire street seemed to pause. Shopkeepers leaned forward. Children stopped playing. A few neighbors stepped out from their doors, squinting, trying to recognize the woman in the official attire. And then someone whispered, "That's Farhat's girl. The one who ran away." Aliyah didn't look at them. Her eyes were locked on the gate ahead, the rusted, green one that had once slammed behind her as she walked away with nothing but a bag and a dream. Now, she was back. Not to beg, not to prove anything, but to take what was rightfully hers. She knocked once. Farhat opened the door, her expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "You?" she breathed. "What are you doing here?" Aliyah met her eyes without flinching. "I came to collect Baba's journal. It's in the bookshelf." Farhat stood frozen. "You think wearing that uniform changes who you are?" Aliyah's reply was quiet but firm. "It doesn't change who I am. It proves who I've always been." From behind the curtain, her step-siblings peeked out but didn't dare come forward. The same voices that once mocked her were silent now. Farhat stepped aside stiffly, and Aliyah entered the living room, walked to the shelf, and picked up the worn leather-bound journal. She brushed the dust off gently. Her father's name was embossed on the cover. Without another word, she turned and walked out. Heads turned as she passed down the street, back straight, eyes forward. This time, she wasn't leaving in shame. She was walking in victory. Being posted to her hometown had felt, at first, like a test. But Aliyah took it as an opportunity, a chance to transform the very ground that once tried to bury her. Her office was a modest building near the district courthouse, but the weight of her authority was real. She wasted no time drafting reforms and launching programs. Scholarships for underprivileged girls. Helplines for victims of domestic abuse. Free night classes for women who had been denied education. She visited schools in dusty villages, sat with mothers who had lost hope, and shook hands with teachers who had never seen a female officer so young, so relentless. Word of her spread. The girl once laughed at now appeared in the local papers with headlines like, "Young Officer Revives Forgotten Dreams." People began to listen when she spoke, not because of her title, but because she had lived the pain they were still trapped in. One day, she was invited to speak at an all-girls school. As she stepped onto the stage, she scanned the crowd, and there she was. Her half-sister, sitting in the third row, shrinking in her seat. Farhat's daughter. Aliyah didn't flinch. She looked at the rows of young faces and began, "I was once told I didn't matter. That my voice, my mind, my dreams were worthless." Her voice didn't tremble. "But I am standing here today to tell you this. Never let anyone convince you that your worth lies in silence. Speak. Dream. Fight." The applause rose like thunder, but Aliyah's eyes held steady on one girl who finally looked up, perhaps seeing her sister not as a warning, but as a way out. Thunder rolled outside as rain lashed against the windows of Aliyah's modest government-allocated apartment. She was reviewing case files by candlelight when a knock came, hesitant, uneven. She checked the time, nearly midnight. Opening the door, she froze. Farhat stood there, soaked to the bone, shawl clinging to her shoulders, makeup streaked with tears. The proud woman who once ruled over Aliyah's every breath now looked like a ghost, hollowed by hardship, humbled by desperation. "My husband is gone," she choked out. "He left without warning. Took what little we had. The bank's taken the house. We have nowhere to go." Aliyah said nothing. She stood in silence, absorbing every word, every tremble in the voice that had once called her worthless. Farhat's voice cracked. "You have power now. Please, help us." The moment hung heavy. Years of pain, cruelty, and silence stood between them like a wall. Aliyah could feel the weight of her past pressing against her chest, but she didn't look away. Finally, she spoke, voice low but clear. "I'll help. Not for you." Farhat's eyes widened. "For the children you've broken," Aliyah finished. "Because they deserve a chance I was never given." She didn't invite her in. She simply closed the door gently and made a phone call that would change their fate. True to her word, Aliyah made the necessary calls the next morning. Within 48 hours, Farhat was placed in a women's transitional shelter where counseling, meals, and support were offered. No special favors, just dignity, something Aliyah herself had once begged the world for. Her half-siblings were enrolled in local government schools, their fees waived under the district's scholarship policy. Uniforms, books, and transportation, all arranged with quiet efficiency. Aliyah never visited the shelter. She never needed to. She checked in through reports, ensuring the children were attending classes, that Farhat was cooperating with caseworkers. But she kept her distance. She had done what was needed, not out of affection, but out of principle. She didn't forgive, not completely. And she certainly didn't forget. The scars were there, thin but deep. But she refused to let them define her any longer. One evening, as she sat with Zoya on the rooftop of the hostel they had once shared, sipping chai and listening to the distant sounds of the city, Zoya nudged her playfully. "You know, you've become what we used to stay up dreaming about." Aliyah looked out at the horizon, where the sky was bleeding from orange into purple. She smiled, not proudly, but with quiet knowing. "No," she said softly. "I've become what I was told I could never be." And for the first time, the fire in her heart wasn't burning in defiance. It was glowing with peace. The light in Aliyah's office was warm and steady, even on the cloudiest days. The walls were simple, painted soft cream, but lined with impact, charts tracking local school enrollments, photos of women who had started their own businesses, handwritten thank you notes from girls whose lives had been changed by her policies. Behind her desk, 2 frames hung side by side. One held her official civil service appointment, stamped, signed, and sealed by the government. It gleamed under the glass, proud and unshakable. The other was quieter, yet somehow more powerful, a collage of jagged paper pieces, faded now but carefully reassembled. The shredded remains of her old graduation certificate, each torn edge fitted lovingly back into place, taped like a scar that had finally closed. People often asked about it. "Why hang that? Why not get a new copy?" She would smile gently, glance at the fragile lines running across the paper, and say, "Because that was the beginning." That afternoon, a knock came at the door. A girl stepped inside, hesitant, her eyes red from crying. She looked about 16, clutching a plastic bag with only a book and a change of clothes. "They kicked me out," she said. "I just wanted to keep studying." Olivia rose, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a fresh notebook, the same kind she once scribbled dreams into, under a dim light with the world against her. On the cover, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Someday, when I return." She handed it to the girl, gently but firmly. "Let's begin again," she said. And the flame that once burned inside her quietly passed into another soul, ready to write her own story, one page, one fight, one dream at a time.